This is Pet Life Radio. Let's talk pets.
Welcome to Covered in Pet Hair, a boozy web show for pet lovers on Pet Life Radio. I'm your host, Isabel Alvarez-Arrada, and today I have the pleasure of having a drink and a chat with the foremost expert on separation anxiety in dogs. I'll tell you all about her and introduce you as soon as we come back from these messages from our sponsors. Welcome back to Covered in Pet Hair. I'm your host, Isabel Alvarez-Arrada, and today I have the pleasure of having a drink with a pet parent, a dog trainer, an author, a researcher and entrepreneur. She's a dog person through and through, a foodie and wine snob, so much so that she lives in California wine country to prove it. She's a world traveler, educator of dog professionals, Californian born and raised, wife to retired dog trainer Kevin, dog Malena De Martini, and Mabel. She's the one, the only Malena De Martini, foremost expert on separation anxiety in dogs. Welcome, Malena.
Oh my gosh, I'm so humbled by that beautiful introduction. I'm not even sure what to say. And I don't know, I don't blush on Zoom, but I might be blushing.
Oh, yay, that's wonderful. So I have to introduce.
It's the beverage. It might be the beverage.
It must be, but I have to introduce my guests in all of their glory because y'all are so amazing. I pick and choose people that I find fascinating or who are doing amazing things. So I need to give a proper introduction.
You're so kind. Well, I'm thrilled to be here and Covered in Pet Hair. I mean, the best name ever, right?
Thank you. It is my life. I have two little ones who I don't want. My little one who just started school, Noah, I have to dress him at the end of the morning to get him in the car and at school before he gets covered in pet hair. So like that is so important to me.
I get it. And you must own stock in those roller things.
I should, but you know what? I've given up and I just, whatever. So long as he gets his pants on as soon as he's walking out the door, I'm good. I don't care about me. My husband's in the military. His uniform is designed to look like dirt. So like, he's fine covered in dog hair, pet hair, but the little one, I don't want him to be like the like furry kid at school.
What was the kid's name in Peanuts that had the cloud?
There you go. I can't remember his name, but yes.
I can't remember his name, but we don't want him to be that.
No, I don't want that. Poor, I gotta give him a chance, a fighting chance at life.
Fighting chance.
Before we go any further, anybody participating in our drinking game today, every time that you hear this word, make sure you take a drink of whatever it is you're enjoying. But please remember, 21 to drink in the US, never drink and drive, and always drink responsibly. What are you drinking tonight, Malena?
Well, it's a little early in the day. Normally I would be enjoying a vodka and soda, but I'm having a little bit of an afternoon beverage of a white wine spritzer.
Ooh, I love me a spritzer. Very nice.
Yes. It's so California, right?
It is, especially now that summer is on the horizon. So are you a full California wine drinker or do you vary your regions throughout the world?
Interesting. I do love me California wines, no question. But I had a really thorough education. I was in the wine industry for a long time prior to being in the dog world. And I had a beautifully thorough education about wines in general. We used to have these contests that were crazy that they would say, okay, everybody stand up. And then they would say, okay, taste this wine. And everybody who thinks it's from this region, raise your hand. And everybody that didn't raise their hand or did raise their hand or whatever, if you got the question wrong, everybody had to sit down. So, and there was usually only 2 or 3 people standing like this, with their final glass of wine. And they were down to like vintages and exact oh my gosh, what is the exact varietal mix and all this kind of stuff. It was crazy, but it was a lot of fun.
That sounds awesome. I want in my future life, maybe as a retiree, I will become a sommelier. I think one day I will do something like that because my family is from northern Spain. I grew up visiting wineries. Wine has always been on my table. I love the wine culture. I love to learn about wines. So one day, maybe I'll be playing that game one day.
Maybe you will, and I will be cheering you on throughout.
That's so cool that you have a background in wine. I should have just had wine today, but in honor of your last name, I had to pick up some kind of martini. So like, here's a sake martini.
A sake martini?
Yes.
And what makes it cloudy?
It's an unfiltered sake.
Oh, well.
Cheers. Thank you for being on the show. It's such a pleasure to meet you.
It's such a pleasure to meet you. And I'm so glad that you know the real rule of cheers. Like, when someone says cheers and raises their glass and puts it down, I'm like, oh, no, you did not.
Thank you. I always look so awkward at the end of the show. And I'm always like telling my guests, like, every time I say cheers, I'm going to take a drink because it's bad luck if I don't. And I just don't want that kind of drama in my life.
I don't need any of that.
Well, I start this show with a game for all of my guests that I obviously tailor to the discussion that we're having. And today, because we're talking about something so important, separation anxiety, and something that so many pet parents experience or will experience at some point in their pet loving life, I am going to play with you. It's called, Is It a Myth?
Oh, and there's so many of them.
Exactly. So I'm going to give you some scenarios or circumstances or statements, and you're going to tell me if they are a myth or if they're based in facts. And you can certainly elaborate if there's something kind of like a gray area there.
Okay. So this is like not truth or dare, but this is sort of like one of those kind of games. It's
kind of like two truths and a lie, but they're more than two truths and more than one lie.
I love it. I love it.
All right, let's get started. Is it a myth? Letting dogs in bed with us will lead to separation anxiety.
Boom, it's a myth.
Yes, it certainly is.
It's a really big myth. And just, I don't want to elaborate on every one of these, but I want every pet parent out there to know that the quote unquote spoiling of your dog, which in my opinion means you're treating your dog like a family member, that does not lead to separation anxiety.
You know what? This reminds me a lot of parenting, and I'm a very natural-minded parent, so biologically, developmentally appropriate things I allow my children to do. And everybody says that if you pay your child too much attention, they'll be super needy. And science shows us the opposite, where they get their needs met, they actually are more independent in the long run. So when I heard you say that in one of your interviews, I was like, yes, more proof that my parenting is not going to cause my children to be dependent on me until they're 35.
Nope, not in the least.
All right, next one. The only way to deal with separation anxiety in dogs is medicating the pet.
Another myth, but I do need to also elaborate on this one. Medication can play an important role for many dogs, and we have to maybe equate this to if you have a friend, a family member, a colleague that is experiencing some debilitating anxiety or depression. You wouldn't say, hey, pull yourself up by the bootstraps and get over it. Like, you know what? Medication can play a very important role, and don't be so terribly afraid of it. It's not going to change your dog's personality. That is actually the opposite of what we want it to do. So I'm glad you brought this one up.
Thank you. Okay, next one. Rescue dogs are more prone to having separation anxiety than purebred dogs purchased from breeders.
Boom, another myth. Now, I have to caveat this because the research is a little bit out. The jury is a little on a standing still. There are some research studies that say, purebred dogs do not have the same propensity towards separation anxiety. But interestingly enough, the overwhelming research shows that it is not a rescue situation that dictates whether a dog will have separation anxiety or related behaviors.
Perfect. Fantastic. Crates are a good tool in mitigating the effects of separation anxiety.
So this is a myth, but there are some nuances to that. There are some dogs that absolutely love their crates, but I need to say something about that. There's a lot of dogs that love to sleep in their crates, love to hang out in their crates, but the moment that you leave them, the crate becomes a scary place. And that is oftentimes what we talk about when we discuss trigger stacking, right? They're like, yeah, I like my crate when you're home, Mom. But when you leave, my fear goes up and then I don't feel okay in my crate. So it is not a go-to for separation anxiety dogs.
Fantastic. Separation anxiety is biologically normal at certain stages in development.
Truth.
Yay!
Big truth.
When does that happen usually?
So yeah, separation anxiety is evolutionarily appropriate for young puppies. Now, you'll love this as a mom, I bet, because this is true for children too, right? They don't all, but they oftentimes go through stages of mommy, 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 don't leave me, mommy. And the thing that is important that we all take away from that is that just because it's evolutionarily, biologically appropriate does not mean we need to let the puppy, or for that matter, the child, cry it out.
Right. Yes. Thank you. I love that. Separation anxiety manifests through vocalization, destruction, and/or elimination.
Truth, with a caveat. Those are the three sort of like, what is it called? Cerebus is the three-headed dog, right? Right. Those are the three main symptoms that are discussed by most dog guardians. But there's so many other indicators and body language that we can see, starting from the most minimal, just, licking of the lips, to yawning, to subtle whining. And then there's interesting sort of silent suffering, like drooling, trembling, pacing, that nobody hears outside of the apartment door wall, but that doesn't mean that the dog isn't suffering.
Oh, that's so good. Like, I think this is such an important topic because my husband, I just asked him before our interview, do you have any questions on separation anxiety? And he was like, why do people think it doesn't exist? Like, why do people think it's just like nonsense?
Yeah.
Do you find that some pet parents are like, nah, that's not a thing. My pet doesn't have that.
So one of the reasons that I think that people think it's nonsense is phobias, which this is, by definition, are irrational to the individual that is not experiencing it. So for my friend Lori, who is terrified of flying on an airplane, and I fly on airplanes all the time, I'm like, no big deal. Like, I could see how I could, if I were a certain person, I might say, she's crazy. It's just dumb. Get over it, girl. And I could also see that I would maybe try to explain to her, oh, you're more likely to get harmed in a car incident than on an airplane. But that doesn't make a dent in her fear.
For sure.
So that irrationality, I think, is what plagues people, because they're like, I always come back. This is dumb. Of course the dog knows I will always come back, but they don't, because it's a phobia where they don't comprehend that.
For sure. And you likened the reaction of separation anxiety in one of your interviews to a panic attack. So is a dog experiencing similar physiological reactions as we do when we have anxiety or panic attacks?
Absolutely. So panic attacks, and that's the thing, is that the only information that we have is this external body language. So we maybe hear the dog howling or whining. We see all these external indicators, but we rarely have heart monitors on our dogs. And usually by the time we come home, the sweaty paw prints are already evaporated. And, so we don't see all and oftentimes we see panting and drooling and things, but by the time we get home, the dog is, excited because we're walking in the door. So we
Right.
don't see all of those indicators that are physiological and emotional.
So you mentioned again in one of your interviews that separation anxiety is the most researched behavior or condition. What should I refer to it as? Is it a condition?
Yeah, it's a behavioral, it's actually considered a behavioral syndrome. And I
Okay.
won't go into why it's a syndrome, not a condition, blah, blah, blah. It's like a long research topic study, but, discussion. Yeah, it's a behavioral syndrome, and it has been the most researched in the past 4 decades over aggression and some of the other behavioral concerns that are out there. And I want to add to that, we are seeing, as you probably have experienced in your own show, in the last year, we've seen this huge increase in new puppies and adopted dogs. And we know from the research that anywhere from 22 to 55% of the dog population, the pet dog population, is afflicted by separation anxiety. 50%, if I just chose that round number, 50% of the dogs, if they are afflicted with separation related problems, that's 38 million pet dogs in the US alone.
Wow. I had no idea it was that prevalent.
It's quite prevalent.
Wow. So, what has the research that has been done taught us? Because I know it hasn't taught us everything we need to know, but what are the things that we know for sure about separation anxiety? Maybe the top few.
Well, let me back it up. The thing that we really don't know very much about is causation. We are starting to get some really interesting research about the genetic propensity for separation anxiety, which interestingly enough is not surprising because we've known for a long time that fear type behaviors are genetically related or can be. But I want to make sure that people understand, just because it might be or potentially is genetically inspired, there's all sorts of things that play into that. So that doesn't mean that it can't be resolved. There's epigenetics, there's environment, there's training, there's so many things. So it's not that it can't be resolved just because it's genetic, but we do know a lot of things that don't cause separation anxiety. And you already mentioned one, letting the dog sleep in your bed, and similar others are like, letting them hang out on your couch, or taking them on a bunch of errands, or giving them lots of treats, or general spoiling activities. We know that that is not causational, which is great news, because quite frankly, if everybody that quote unquote spoiled their dog had separation anxiety issues, we would be in a world of trouble.
For sure. I also want to know why you think that rescue dogs have the reputation for having a higher propensity for separation anxiety.
This is a really good question. And this is a bit of a chicken and the egg. There are many rescue dogs that have been relinquished to the shelter or the rescue because of their separation related issues. And so if we have a higher incidence of dogs that are relinquished to the shelter for that reason, we might see a higher outcome on the other end, right? And it's no secret that traumatic events for some dogs will inspire problems with separation stuff. And so, yeah, it does make sense. But interesting, even like we have so many clients that have had their pups since, 9 weeks old, great life. And at 5 years old, they moved to a new house and the dog starts to have separation anxiety, right? So anything can be considered a traumatic event. And what's so funny about the purebred dogs is now that we're finding more and more about the genetic predisposition, we're seeing that, I'm not a geneticist, FYI, we can drink to that. But there's an actual a haplotype, which is a genetic word, which basically means a genetic marker, right? That is they've discovered that is in relation to separation anxiety. And one of the important things to know about that is that those are passed on through genes. And we have so many puppies. And here's another myth buster. Puppies cannot get separation anxiety. Not true. And even purebred from the best breeders can have separation anxiety. So no, I think that the rescue dogs just get a bad rep. And it's very common that people say, oh, he's a rescue dog, and therefore, but quite frankly, our dogs are resilient. And so it's not necessarily the shelter environment that is inspiring, separation related issues. But I do understand that it's more common than not to assume that that's where it's occurring.
That is such a good way to take a break right now, and we'll resume with more details about what people can do to help their pet if they have separation anxiety. So sit tight. We'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors. Welcome back to Covered in Pet Hair. I'm your host, Isabel Alvarez-Arata, and today I am talking about a very serious topic, but I'm having a really good time doing it. Thank you, Malena De Martini, for being such a good guest and such an enjoyable guest. I know we have to talk about something kind of heavy like separation anxiety, but I like to keep things light. So I have a second game for you today. This one's called Bravo or Bogus. And this is, I guess, what a pet parent might use to appease their dog with separation anxiety. And I want you to tell me if you would say to this person, bravo, good job, that's a nice option, or that's kind of bogus. What are you thinking?
Okay, I hope I don't bogus a bunch of things that people feel strongly about, but I'm going to tell the truth.
You have to tell the truth because in dog training, which I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, there are a lot of myths and techniques that are perpetuated that do nothing but potentially harm pets. And we want that to end right here, especially in this topic.
Yes, I agree.
All right, first one. A pet parent leaves his pet alone for small increments of time to desensitize him or her to being left alone. Bravo or bogus?
Bravo with a caveat.
What's the caveat?
The caveat is, what do we define small increments of time as? So if you go on the internet and research separation anxiety, oftentimes the information says, well, start out with leaving them for 5 minutes and then move to 10 and then move to 20. For some dogs, that is so far past the amount of time that they're able to tolerate successfully that actually you're harming the process rather than helping it. So yes, that is the basis of gradual exposure is what we do with these dogs. But what you need to determine is, where is your dog's panic point? And if it's 3 seconds, then you're only going to leave for 2 seconds. And I know that sounds like a tall order, but it does advance quickly. You've got to start with the place that the dog in front of you is able to handle.
I love it. Yes. Like, don't put them at threshold. Keep them below threshold every time. Yes. That makes so much sense. A pet parent uses zip ties to keep their pet in their crate to prevent the destruction behaviors that they display when they are having a separation anxiety event.
Yeah, that's a big, big bogus one. And it's one that actually tugs at my heartstrings a lot because people say, well, my dog's destructive, so I've got to put him in the crate. Oh, but he breaks out of the crate, so I have to use zip ties and safety locks and all these things to keep him in the crate. And quite frankly, we're simply confining the dog with their panic. And we don't want to do that. It can exacerbate the problem, and it actually can lead to injury, self-harm, broken teeth, broken nails. Dogs pull at the crate bars and they can puncture themselves. I mean, there are so many safety issues that need to be addressed, and those zip ties are just not the way to go about it.
You know, I used to run a pet care business in Northern Virginia before I started this show. COVID put the kibosh on that business. But I had a client who I'm thinking of right now, and his name was Blue, and he was wonderful, beautiful, but he had separation anxiety. And so they would use a padlock on the crate. And as his pet care provider and owner of the business, thinking about the liability, I was like, what if there's an emergency and we can't get him out? What if you forget to leave us the key to the padlock? What if there's a fire and the fire department comes in and doesn't know to look for the dog in the crate that is padlocked? Yeah. So many safety issues. And I had to say, absolutely not. We cannot use a padlock. In this particular dog's case, they got a second dog to help with separation anxiety. So do you think bogus or bravo getting a second dog to keep the first dog company?
I wish it was a bravo, but it's a bogus. It's a bogus. Yes. And here's the thing that I always advise our clients. If you are like, I can't wait to get a second dog in my life, well, bring in a second dog. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you are thinking, I'd like to get a second dog to fix my first dog, don't do it. Not only is having two dogs more than 2 dogs worth of work, having 2 dogs, one with separation anxiety, which probably will not be fixed by the second, there's the potential for contagion. We don't want your second dog to also have separation anxiety. And there's also, a concern that we're just, sort of throwing spaghetti at the wall there, right? And then now you have a living, breathing, sentient being, second dog in your home, and you've got to address the needs of both of them.
For sure. Absolutely. In the case of Blue, it did not help. And unfortunately, Blue was rehomed because the family was not capable of meeting his needs. And they did the right thing by him. And in the Northern Virginia area, he was probably rehomed by a family that was ready and willing to work with him.
Love it.
Yes. Okay, next one. A pet parent leaves and sets up a Zoom meeting to record the pet's behavior while they're gone. Bogus or bravo?
Oh, big bravo. Bravo. But I want people to know, you don't have to leave for an hour or 2 or 3, particularly post-pandemic times when many dogs have not been left alone for very long or at all. Let's drive around the block once and set up that Zoom meeting or, camera of whatever type, and determine if our dog is experiencing distress and anxiety when left alone.
Perfect. Awesome. A pet parent uses herbals and or CBD to help reduce separation anxiety symptoms.
Ooh, okay. So this is my bias, and I want people to hear that. This I'm going to call bogus. And I just have seen that there is very little research that supports that many of the nutraceuticals, herbals, holistics, and organics, including CBD, are affecting separation anxiety positively, or even positively enough, maybe is a better way to say it, that it will help the animal's welfare.
You know, it's back to what you said about it being a phobia. So if I have a phobia, you can give me a CBD dropper full of whatever, and I'm still gonna have a phobia. So if I have a mild case of anxiety one day, the CBD might take the edge off. But for something as serious as separation anxiety or a phobia, it's not gonna make a dent.
I love that you say that. I used to tell people all the time, I used to suffer terribly from insomnia. And people used to tell me all the time, drink sleepy time tea.
I'm familiar with the tea. Yeah, it's fine.
And there's nothing wrong with drinking sleepy time tea. And if you don't suffer from insomnia, it probably will, chamomile or whatever will probably, help you get cozy at night. But if you are suffering with an issue that is that severe, chamomile's not going to touch it.
Was it my mom telling you that? Because in my family, chamomile cures everything.
Your mom and my mom, are they friends or related?
I mean, it's not enough, but we'll definitely have the tea. All right. Next one. A pet parent pee pad trains or installs a doggy door so that the pet can relieve themselves when they're feeling separation anxiety.
Whoa, okay, this is a little bit of a tricky one, because if they're pee pad training or dog door training because the dog actually needs to relieve themselves, not from anxious behavior, but because they're gone for 3 hours and the dog needs to actually go, then I would say it's generally a bravo. But if they're doing it because the pet is eliminating indoors out of anxiety, then it's a bogus.
Because it's not going to work, right? They're going to eliminate wherever they are. They're not really in a conscious state where they're going to be like, oh, I should go outside because I need to urinate.
This is so involuntary, as is defined by a phobia, right?
Correct.
This is an involuntary physical reaction. And I always say, people often use the expression, my God, I'm going to pee my pants, I'm so scared. Well, if dogs were wearing pants, they would pee them.
Absolutely.
And they are afraid, right?
Absolutely.
Fear is powerful.
It really is. And so they're not going to remember to be like, oh, I'm scared, I should go outside I should go find the pee-pee pad.
No, not at all.
Last one, providing enrichment and exercise is a cure for separation anxiety.
All right, well, the key word there is cure, and it is absolutely bogus. It is neither of those are a cure for separation anxiety. And obviously enrichment and exercise are so important for our dogs, but it's not going to touch separation anxiety. And one of the things that always worries me, particularly about the exercise, here's the thing, most of the dogs in the US are somewhat under exercise, not most, but a lot. But in the recommendation of, increase the exercise times 20, you're going to build an athlete that still has separation anxiety. Like that's all you're doing, right?
Right.
So.
Well, I there's always that saying, a tired pup is a happy pup, and that's true for most dogs, unless they have a syndrome like this.
Imagine if you were like, I'm going to go for a 10-mile run, and at 9.5 miles, someone, I don't know, pulled a gun on you or something. Would you be like, I'm too tired, I'm not going to react?
That's such a good analogy. Absolutely. Absolutely. I even had like a reaction to that scenario, and it's not even real. And so, yes, I can totally see that scenario being a really great analogy for people. Okay, so are there any other conditions that manifest very similarly to separation anxiety where people might be like, oh, it's not separation anxiety, it's XYZ?
There are some, what the vets call differential diagnoses. And the most common, so if someone comes home and they see their, couch pillows ripped to shreds, they may think, oh my gosh, my dog has separation anxiety. But we need to get into the assessment aspect, because destruction can be for reasons of boredom, can be reasons of frustration. It can be redirection because the dog is seeing dogs outside the window and getting frustrated and ripping up the pillows or what have you. Inappropriate or insufficient house training. If the dog urinates or defecates in the house other times, or if even only when left alone, but they've been punished for urinating or defecating in front of the owner, they may be like, oh, thank God I can finally pee in the house because no one's home and I won't get in trouble. And then vocalization. There's a lot of environmental external stimuli that dogs will happily bark at, you know, the squirrels, the cats in the neighborhood, the people passing by the window, etc., the apartment building noises, all of that. And so that's why we're so lucky to live in this day and age with technology like Zoom and other, you know, cameras and things that we can use. So we can say, is this dog upset? Yes or no? And then if you say no, then we can discern frustration or other issues. If the answer is yes, by looking at that dog's body language, then we need to address it very, very systematically and carefully.
When we return home, if our pets are just super duper excited to see us, is that at all a sign of maybe them having had separation anxiety while we were gone? Is there like a gauge on what's normal reception and what's extra?
So there's a gauge, but it's a gauge for your individual dog. And so I always like to tell people we have to find the baseline. And so if you walk out to take out the recycling and your dog's like, oh my God, you've been gone 26 seconds and I'm so excited to see you. And if that's the way he or she reacts when you're gone for an hour or 3, or just to take out the recycling, that's just their baseline behavior, and that's okay. If your dog reacts like, you're back from the recycling, please don't bother me, I'm napping. But then when you're gone for an hour, they're bleeping and, you know, jumping and screaming, etc. That would be a worthy investigation to take on.
I mean, that's so easy to do. People
Yeah.
check it, keep like, it's just a matter of observation. And then
Yes.
we can do any more digging if we need to. So how does training help separation anxiety dogs? What kind of process, what does the process look like?
So the process, which by the way, is the exact same process that we use for human beings that have fears and phobias and anxieties. Okay. It was developed in the late 1950s by a couple of scientists. Nobody recognizes the name of Wolp, but everybody knows Pavlov.
Yes.
Right. Everyone's like, oh, the bell guy. We know the bell guy. Right. And Wolp and Pavlov developed a process which has a big long word. It's called systematic desensitization. And don't worry about the word. It's not important for most, but the process is taking gradual exposure of the scary stimuli. And in this instance, it would be alone time, right? So gradual exposure of alone time, and making sure that the dog is always feeling safe during that gradual exposure, and then very systematically and incrementally increasing that over time. And, you know, and again, I go back to the example that you said, oh, well, 5 or 10 minutes or whatever. For some dogs, it's truly a few seconds that you need to start out with, or less. Some dogs, it's just jiggling the doorknob, you know, or walking to the door, those sorts of things. But it does increase over time. And I love to remind people that, you know, you're going to have your dog, let's just knock on wood and hope you're going to have your dog 15, 16, 17, 18 years. Let's put in this temporary time towards training so that the next 15 years, you don't have to worry about your dog being alone.
So I know you employ is it 100 dog trainers?
Well, I don't employ all 120 right now. I've trained 120 some odd and growing.
Wow.
But for my personal company, we have 15 that are actually under my employ. And we take on clients all over the world. And we also have a self-paced online course because we realize not everybody has the time or the means to work one-on-one 5 days a week with a trainer. And so our online self-paced course called Mission Possible is available for anybody and everybody. And I go in there every single day, 7 days a week, and answer people's questions and comments.
That is amazing. So how can our viewers and listeners learn more about all of the things that you offer?
Well, they can certainly go to my website, which is MalenaDeMartini.com. And there's all sorts of free resources there. Go through all the blogs, go through all the, information. I'm so passionate about this issue that I'm trying to the best of my ability to help people, even if they don't have the resources, to be able to, have a personal trainer, an individual dog professional helping them. And so there's a lot of free stuff that they can peruse there. But we actually also offer a 30-minute no charge call to anybody that is worried and concerned and reaches out to us.
That is amazing. And I will say that all of the interviews that I watched were on YouTube, and you have a YouTube channel, and just searching your name, I had a ton of interviews that I was able to pull from. So don't forget YouTube. And while you're at YouTube, make sure you subscribe to Covered in Pet Hair, please. Here's a plug for me. And subscribe to Malena too. So I have to wrap it up. I want to thank you so much, Malena, for your time and for your expertise and for all of the benefit that these dogs are reaping from your research and your training. Cheers.
Cheers.
I also want to propose a toast to my executive producer, Mark Winter, for making this show possible, and to our listeners on Pet Life Radio and our viewers on YouTube. Here's to a life covered in pet hair, because there's no better way to live. Cheers.
Cheers to that too.
To learn more about Covered in Pet Hair, please visit coveredinpethair.com or petliferadio.com. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.